It happened on a Saturday night. Most of the football world was asleep or winding down or minding their own business. And then the news dropped like a bomb, and the entire AFC North shifted on its axis. A blockbuster trade. A franchise-altering deal. A move that should have been Cleveland's, that reportedly was Cleveland's, with the Browns reportedly the leading destination just hours before the announcement, was ripped away in the final moments by a division rival who swooped in, outbid everyone, and completely changed the landscape of one of the most brutal divisions in professional football. And now the Cleveland Browns, already carrying more baggage than any franchise alive, are staring at an AFC North that has never looked more dangerous. A division where they are projected to finish dead last by virtually every analyst, every power ranking, and every prediction currently floating through the football world. The nightmare is real. The division is in danger. And what Cleveland does in the next 72 hours on draft night in Pittsburgh may be the most consequential decision this franchise has made in a generation. If this is the kind of story you need to follow every single second, and trust me, you do, then subscribe right now. Hit the bell, because this is not slowing down before the draft. If anything, it's about to get louder. Stay with us. Let's go back to Saturday night, April 19th, 2026. The 2026 NFL Draft is 4 days away. The Cleveland Browns have been preparing for months. 9 draft picks loaded and ready, 2 first-round selections in their back pocket, a franchise desperate to make a transformational move and finally close the gap on a division that has been running laps around them for the better part of 2 decades. And then, late on a Saturday night, NFL Network insiders Ian Rappaport and Mike Garafolo broke the news that detonated across every NFL platform within minutes. The New York Giants were trading 3-time Pro Bowl defensive tackle Dexter Lawrence to the Cincinnati Bengals in exchange for the number 10 overall pick in the 2026 NFL Draft. Cincinnati also agreed to a 1-year, $28 million contract extension with Lawrence, keeping him in Cincinnati through 2028. NFL. The football world immediately understood the magnitude of what had just happened. The Bengals, a team that had been quietly and aggressively retooling their defense all offseason, just landed one of the most dominant interior defensive linemen in the NFL. A player who, from 2022 to 2024, generated more pressures from the defensive tackle position than virtually anyone in the game. A player who had made 3 consecutive Pro Bowls and who had been widely regarded as the best one-technique tackle in professional football before an elbow injury dragged his production down in 2025. A player who now, paired with Trey Hendrickson's replacement edge pieces and the defensive additions Cincinnati had already made in free agency, transforms the Bengals' defense from a catastrophic liability into a legitimate strength seemingly overnight. But here's the part that should make every Cleveland Browns fan feel physically ill. Here's the detail buried inside this story that changes the entire narrative from a Bengals win into a Cleveland catastrophe. According to NFL reporter Josh Taylor, early Saturday morning, before the Bengals deal was finalized, it appeared that Lawrence was being dealt into the AFC North, likely to the Cleveland Browns. Yahoo Sports, likely to the Cleveland Browns. Sit with that for a moment. In the hours before the Bengals swooped in and closed the deal, the working assumption among people with knowledge of the situation was that Dexter Lawrence was going to Cleveland. The Browns were apparently in the conversation, actively, seriously, for one of the most impactful defensive players available anywhere in the NFL. Reports indicated that Cleveland's best offer had been a second-round pick, the best offer on the table for Lawrence at that point in negotiations. Dogs by nature. A second-round pick for Dexter Lawrence. Think about what that would have meant. Think about what that combination would have looked like. Myles Garrett on one side of the defensive line, the man who just broke the all-time single-season sack record with 23 sacks in 2025, and Dexter Lawrence collapsing the pocket from the interior. Any offensive line in the AFC North trying to protect their quarterback against both of those forces simultaneously would be facing a nightmare scenario unlike anything they had ever dealt with. The Ravens' offensive linemen, the Steelers' offensive linemen, the Bengals' own offensive linemen, the ones that protect Joe Burrow, The quarterback whose health is always the most delicate and most consequential variable in Cincinnati's entire season. That defensive line would not just have been good. It would have been historically terrifying. It would have been the kind of defensive front that reshapes a division, that forces coordinators to completely redesign their game plans, that turns games into defensive masterclasses where the quarterback never has time to throw and the running game has nowhere to breathe. It would have been the defining addition that told the rest of the AFC North, Cleveland is back. Cleveland is not a punching bag anymore. Cleveland is coming for everyone. And then Cincinnati stepped in. It sounds like the Bengals got aggressive late in the process, outbidding Cleveland by offering the number 10 overall pick, a premium they were willing to pay that Cleveland apparently was not. Cincy Jungle. Cleveland had a second-round pick on the table. Cincinnati threw a top 10 first-round selection at the Giants. There is no negotiation where a second-round pick beats a top 10 first-rounder. There is no Cleveland counteroffer that makes sense when your divisional rival is willing to sacrifice a pick that high to win the bidding war. The Bengals saw what the Browns were building, understood exactly what Garrett plus Lawrence would mean for the AFC North, and decided to pay whatever price was necessary to prevent that nightmare from becoming a reality, while simultaneously claiming Lawrence for their own defense in the process. As the Dog by Nature report put it, the Bengals stole a huge improvement from a divisional opponent while simultaneously improving themselves. It's a double blow. Cleveland doesn't get the player, and now that player is suiting up twice a year against Cleveland's offense instead. Dogs by Nature. This is the kind of move that defines divisional rivalries for years. The Bengals didn't just make their team better. They made Cleveland's life significantly harder. Because now, when Shedeur Sanders or Deshaun Watson or whoever lines up under center for the Browns in 2026 takes the field against Cincinnati, they will be facing Dexter Lawrence in the middle of that defensive line. The same player who, just hours before that trade was announced, was reportedly headed to Cleveland. And this latest collapse trade doesn't exist in a vacuum. It is the latest chapter in a long, maddening story of Cleveland being left at the altar on big moves. Watching the player they wanted, the deal they needed, the moment that was supposed to be their slip away at the last second and land somewhere else. The Richardson trade that never materialized. The 5-year pick proposal that got laughed out of the owners' meeting before it reached a vote. The A.J. Epineza signing that fell apart at the physical stage. And now this. A Lawrence deal that was apparently Cleveland's to close, ripped away by a division rival who simply wanted it more. The Lawrence trade to Cincinnati has thrown Cleveland's draft strategy into genuine turmoil, according to multiple analysts. The move forces the Browns to completely rethink how they approach the next 4 days, particularly in terms of what they do with the 6th overall pick and how aggressively they invest in the offensive line. Yahoo! Here is the reality of what the AFC North now looks like heading into the 2026 season, and why every Cleveland fan should be deeply, urgently concerned. Let's start with the Cincinnati Bengals, because the transformation of that franchise this offseason has been stunning in its aggressiveness and alarming in its implications for Cleveland. Before the Lawrence trade, Cincinnati had already added edge rusher Boy Mafe, safety Brian Cook, and defensive tackle Jonathan Allen in free agency, completely overhauling a defense that had been among the worst in the AFC for 3 consecutive seasons. Bleacher Report the Bengals were last in the AFC in total defense last year and allowed the 3rd most points per game in the entire league. That defense was the reason Joe Burrow, one of the most talented quarterbacks in football, had been watching the playoffs on television for 3 straight years. Since he had the offensive fur. Multiple power rankings entering the 2026 offseason had the Cincinnati Bengals ranked first in the AFC North, ahead of the Ravens, ahead of the Steelers, and far, far ahead of the Cleveland Browns. The Right Way Network, and that was before the Lawrence trade. That was before Cincinnati announced in the loudest possible way that they were done being the team that lets their best years of Joe Burrow's prime disappear because of a defense that couldn't get off the field. Now let's talk about the Baltimore Ravens, because the Ravens story in 2026 is one that Cleveland should be watching with equal parts fascination and fear. John Harbaugh, The coach who had led Baltimore to the playoffs year after year with the singular combination of Lamar Jackson's generational talent and Harbaugh's own elite organizational competence, is gone. Harbaugh was fired in January 2026 after a brutal injury-plagued 2025 season that cost the Ravens a playoff spot, and he subsequently landed with the New York Giants in their own coaching rebuild. The Right Way Network Baltimore replaced him with Jesse Minter, the former defensive coordinator who had made his name working under Jim Harbaugh in Los Angeles with the Chargers, and who brings a young, analytically driven philosophy to a franchise in transition. But here's the thing about the Baltimore Ravens. They still have Lamar Jackson. They still have the best quarterback in the entire AFC North by a margin that isn't close. They still have a talent base that, even with an aging roster in spots and a first-year head coach learning on the job, makes them a legitimate contender every single year simply because of what Lamar Jackson is capable of doing on a football field. Multiple analysts projected the Ravens as the team the AFC North was Baltimore's to lose in 2026, citing their superior roster talent and the expectation that Minter would field a significantly improved defense after the injury carnage of 2025. NFL Spin Zone and the Pittsburgh Steelers. Oh, the Steelers. The defending AFC North champions. The team that won the division in a Week 18 showdown with Baltimore and then watched legendary head coach Mike Tomlin walk away after 19 seasons as the face of Pittsburgh football. Tomlin's departure was seismic. 19 years, 6 division titles, 0 losing seasons. The man never had a losing record in nearly 2 decades of coaching one of the most competitive rosters in professional football. And then he was gone. Into that void stepped Mike McCarthy, the former Dallas Cowboys head coach and a Pittsburgh native, who immediately partnered with an aging but potentially reinvigorated Aaron Rodgers in a pairing that has captured the imagination of the entire football world. The Right Way Network. Good Morning Football analysts predicted Pittsburgh to defend their division title in 2026 under McCarthy and Rodgers, with the reasoning that a new offensive system, a reinvigorated defense, and the addition of Michael Pittman Jr. at wide receiver alongside DK Metcalf gives the Steelers a genuine shot at a deep playoff run. Steelers Depot TJ, what is still there? The Steelers defense, while aging, remains elite. And this is the division Cleveland is walking into in 2026. This is what the AFC North looks like. Cincinnati loading up with Lawrence and a rebuilt defense around Joe Burrow. Baltimore reset under a new coach, but anchored by Lamar Jackson. Pittsburgh riding the McCarthy-Rodgers experiment with a defense built around one of the best edge rushers alive. In Cleveland, the team projected dead last in virtually every preseason forecast, scrambling to fix a broken offensive line, find a starting quarterback, and now trying to absorb the shock of watching the divisional defensive piece that should have been theirs go to Cincinnati instead. Every major prediction currently has the Browns finishing 4th in the AFC North in 2026. Steelers Depot 4th. Last, in a division they have never won in the post-expansion era. In a division that has grown stronger, more dangerous, and more unpredictable with every single move made this offseason. The window that briefly, very briefly, appeared in January when all 3 of their divisional rivals were simultaneously dealing with major coaching upheavals has already started closing. And the Lawrence trade to Cincinnati just slammed it shut a little faster than anyone expected. As one analyst wrote after the Lawrence deal broke, the Browns are now in one of the scariest divisions in the NFL with one of the worst offensive lines in football. If the goal is to keep their quarterback upright and healthy, Cleveland has to invest heavily, perhaps exclusively, in the offensive line during this draft. And seeing as how the Browns have 2 first-round picks, a second, and a third, they have the ammunition to do it. But they have to actually pull the trigger. Yahoo! That analysis cuts right to the heart of what is wrong with Cleveland right now. And it connects directly to every mistake, every hesitation, every moment of indecision that has defined this franchise's recent history. Because what the Browns needed this offseason, what they needed desperately, urgently, existentially, was not just to add players. It was to make a statement. The Watson trade was supposed to be a statement. It was supposed to tell the AFC North, We are done being a doormat. We are going all in. We believe in ourselves enough to mortgage the future on one player and one moment. And that statement turned into the most expensive, most humiliating, most catastrophic failure in Cleveland Browns history. Now, for years later, the same franchise is trying to rebuild. But every time they reach for something meaningful, every time they try to grab that moment, that player, that trade that changes the trajectory, something goes wrong. The 5-year pick proposal gets laughed out of the room in Phoenix. Anthony Richardson's trade market collapses, and Cleveland was never seriously in it anyway. The A.J. Epineza signing falls apart at the physical. And now Dexter Lawrence, the player who was reportedly headed to Cleveland, whose arrival would have been the most transformational defensive acquisition this organization had made in a decade, goes to Cincinnati instead because the Bengals were willing to pay a first-round pick and Cleveland was not. National analysts warned in the weeks before the draft that the Browns had already put themselves in a difficult position by letting key offensive linemen walk in free agency, including Pro Bowl guard Wyatt Teller, without adequately replacing them. The warning was specific and pointed. Cleveland could end up forced to reach on a left tackle at 6th overall out of pure positional need rather than taking the best player available, which would leave better players on the board for division rivals to grab. Steeler Nation. Fox Sports analyst Joel Klatt put it bluntly, the Browns are going to be stuck. I think they're going to get themselves stuck to the point where they desperately want and need to take an offensive tackle. Steeler Nation, that kind of predictability, that kind of forced hand, is what separates mediocre front offices from great ones. Great front offices create options. They maintain flexibility. They enter draft night with genuine choices, not predetermined obligations born from off-season failures. Cleveland's inability to solve their offensive line problem in free agency has potentially pre-written the first pages of their draft night script before a single pick has been made. And the Bengals' acquisition of Lawrence makes that problem even more acute. Cleveland's offensive line will now face Lawrence twice a year in AFC North games. A player whose interior pressure is among the most disruptive in the NFL, a player who will be making life miserable for whoever the Browns' starting quarterback is from the first snap of the season. Yahoo whether that quarterback is Sanders or Watson or someone they add in the draft. They will be taking the field in Cincinnati with Lawrence collapsing the pocket from the inside while Trey Hendrickson's replacement rushers come off the edge. That is not a situation for a young quarterback to thrive. That is not a situati. And right now, Cleveland doesn't have it. So what do the Browns actually do? What does Andrew Berry's draft night look like after the collapsed Lawrence deal? After the division upgrades by every rival? After a failed offseason that has left Cleveland further behind the AFC North than they were when the calendar turned to 2026? The options, stripped of all the noise and speculation, come down to 3 real paths. Path 1 is the aggressive path. Berry stays at number 6, takes the best offensive tackle available. Most likely Monroe Freeling from Georgia, projected as the top left tackle prospect in this class, and then doubles down at 24 with either a wide receiver or another offensive lineman. This is the path that builds the foundation around Shedeur Sanders. This is the path that says, we believe in our quarterback, we're going to protect him, and we're going to build this team the right way, even if it takes longer than anyone wants. It's not glamorous. It won't generate the kind of draft night excitement that a blockbuster trade produces. But it is arguably the most responsible, most sustainable approach for a franchise that has been making desperate, short-term decisions for 2.5 decades. Path 3 is the wild card. The path nobody is fully accounting for. Berry refused to rule out drafting a quarterback in this draft, saying, I think it's possible. And with the Browns' QB room remaining genuinely unsettled despite Sanders' Pro Bowl nod, the possibility of adding a developmental signal caller with a late pick, or even shaking the entire room up with an earlier selection, cannot be completely dismissed. Yard Barker. But here is what every single analysis, every single power ranking, every single AFC North breakdown reaches as its ultimate conclusion. The path back to relevance for Cleveland runs directly through the offensive line and directly through the quarterback position. Everything else, the receiver visits, the tight end interest, the defensive additions, everything else is secondary to those 2 requirements. Because in a division where Lamar Jackson commands the most complex defensive schemes in football, and where TJ Watt is still terrorizing quarterbacks on the edge, and where Joe Burrow now has Lawrence protecting him from the inside. In that division, if Cleveland's quarterback is on his back every week and throwing to a last-place receiving core, the outcome is already written. The Browns finished 5-12 in 2025. Their offense ranked near the bottom of the entire NFL. Their receivers produced the fewest touchdowns in the league. Their quarterback room was, by almost every statistical measure, the worst group of signal callers in professional football. And the division around them has gotten significantly better this offseason. Not marginally better, not incrementally better, but significantly, aggressively, purposefully better. Cincinnati sacrificed a top 10 pick to get a dominant interior lineman. Baltimore is betting that Minter and a healthy roster and Lamar Jackson's continued evolution will return them to their natural state A. The Dexter Lawrence deal is done. Cincinnati owns him. The AFC North is officially more dangerous than it has been in years. And the Cleveland Browns, sitting on 2 first-round picks and a quarterback room full of question marks, have 4 days to answer the biggest challenge this franchise has faced in a generation. Draft night is coming. What happens in Pittsburgh will echo for years. Pushpin disclaimer. This video is based on publicly available reporting, official team statements, NFL Network and ESPN analysis, and breaking developments as of April 19, 2026. The Dexter Lawrence trade to Cincinnati was announced on the evening of April 19, 2026. All information is accurate to the best available reporting at time of publication and is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only.